I promise you, this is a video about the new Digimon trading card game, which launched in Japan last year and the US this year. But before I can get into what makes the new Digimon card game so cool, so interesting, and so well designed, I need to talk about every other card game first. Trading card games allow for the play of trading cards. For a game to manage what cards you can play, how many you can play, and when, it has to have a resource system. Let's be clear with our terminology. There are a lot of theoretical resources in a card game. You'll often hear Magic players refer to their life total as a resource, and some cards do ask you to pay life to use them. But I want to focus on the most obvious, surface-level resources, whatever it is that most commonly allows you to put cards into play. To that end, I'm going to walk through the resource systems in a variety of card games, what problems they create, and what problems they solve, and why they were designed that way. I'm focusing mostly on popular TCGs, and if I don't mention a game, it's most likely because I'm not familiar with it. Once we've got a solid outline of resource systems from a variety of games, I'll talk about how the Digimon TCG changes things, and how its resource system keeps things fresh. The best place to start is at the beginning, Magic the Gathering. In Magic, you pay mana to cast spells. Mana is most often generated by lands, but can also be created by artifacts, creatures, and spells. Magic also introduces our first common theme, the hard stop. I'm defining the hard stop as a situation where the base rules of the game prevent you from taking a certain action more than once per turn. In Magic, you can only play one land from your hand per turn. This limitation prevents players from getting out high mana cost cards early, and the cards that circumvent this hard stop tend to be powerful, and the very best are banned. Hard stops are a design problem, mostly because they're arbitrary and a memory issue. Ask yourself, just how many times have you had to stop the match to ask your opponent if you've played a land this turn? Then, you have to count your cards in your hand and your lands and determine if you've played a land yet. Ideally, a game should play seamlessly without you having to worry about keeping track of arbitrary counts. In games with hard stops, effects that work around those stops tend to become dominant strategies. Ironically, the limitation of a hard stop itself becomes a centralizing issue in the metagame. How well you can circumvent a hard stop becomes a huge part of playing a powerful deck. The land system in Magic the Gathering has a lot of problems. Lands are individual cards in your deck. This means that sometimes you draw way too many lands and have nothing to play, or you draw way too few and can't play any spells. A lot of time has been spent trying to mitigate this problem within Magic, but the land and mana system are just way too ingrained in the base rules and identity of the game to ever be changed. However, subsequent TCGs have recognized this mana flood, mana screw issue and adjusted their resource systems in an attempt to solve this problem. By the way, I'm not going to talk much about Duel Masters, but as it essentially started out as a fixed version of Magic, it employs a very similar color-based mana system. However, any card can be used as a land. It's an elegant fix, and one that Wizards may have been trying to emulate when they introduced modal dual-faced cards into Magic. If you want to know more about the history and development of Japanese trading card games, I really recommend you check out the Maniacs channel, which has an amazing series on the history of JTCGs. Let's move on to Pokemon, a game with a couple interesting interlocking resources. First, it has Magic-style energy cards, which are part of the deck and represent different types, much like Magic's colors. Just like Magic, these cards are subject to a once-per-turn hard stop. However, energy cards only enable your Pokemon to do attacks, which are required to win the game, but there's no resource system in place for actually playing out Pokemon or other cards. A player can put any number of Pokemon from their hand into play per turn, but there's a limitation on having a maximum of 6 Pokemon in play at once. Also, if you want to play a higher stage Pokemon, you have to evolve it from a lower form, and you can only do that a turn after it's been in play. There are also trainer cards, which have one-time effects, stadium cards, which affect both players, and equipment cards, which enhance individual Pokemon. There's no limit to how many of these you can play a turn, and there's no resource system to give these cards cost. This helps mitigate the energy issue, because it's much easier to search for energy, recycle it from your graveyard, and find it in your deck by playing a lot of trainer cards. Unlike Magic, you can play very few energy cards in your deck, and reasonably expect to get enough to do what you want to do. Or at least, this is how it worked at first. Eventually, it became clear that allowing players to use as many trainer cards per turn, for free, as much as they wanted, gave decks an unbelievable amount of consistency and turn length. The designers wisely made the decision to make certain trainer cards supporters, and you can only play one supporter per turn. Another game, Yu-Gi-Oh!, is a lot like Pokemon in its disregard for resource systems when playing cards. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is also a tricky case because its core rules are inherited from a manga series that wasn't exactly concerned with balance or playability. So while the manga eventually changed to suit the rules of the official card game, the basic decisions about how Yu-Gi-Oh! Is played aren't the product of its game designers. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, there's no resource system whatsoever. There's no energy, no mana, nothing. You can only normal summon one monster per turn, but there are many ways around that hard stop, and bypassing that one summon per turn limit is the basis of most Yu-Gi-Oh! Strategies. Spells and traps can be played out from the hand for free, and as many per turn as you like, but both spells and monsters are limited by space, only 5 of which can exist on your side of the board. Where resources come into play is in the stronger monsters. Playing powerful monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! Requires the tribute of one or more other monsters, literally using your existing cards as resources. More complicated and powerful methods of summons, the ones that most strategies use to win games, require other cards in specific combinations. They want cards with certain names, or with certain spells, or cards of certain ranks or types. With newer Link monsters, even the exact positioning of your monsters on the board becomes important. The problem with Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that highly efficient decks can put themselves in winning positions in just a single turn. Konami has been trying to slow down Yu-Gi-Oh! For years to make it more interactive, but powerful high-speed decks are still dominant, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Turn lengths can be offensive. A lot of Japanese TCG are reliant on 2 of the mechanics we've just talked about: linear evolution and board space. Cardfight Vanguard has you evolve monsters by grades, not by specific names, and there's also limited board space, and where your cards are placed matters a lot to combat. Digital TCGs have taken a very different but very consistent approach to resource systems. They do tend to preserve the limited board space. Hearthstone and Runeterra both limit the number of cards you can have in play, but they also eschew colored mana systems common in other games and instead rely on a purely linear mana system. Hearthstone, Runeterra, Shadowverse, and probably many others all have a mana pool that increases automatically by 1 each turn. This preserves the intended effect of Magic's mana system, slowly ramping up to powerful cards, without having the fuss of including mana cards in your deck and risking the issues you can see in Magic or Pokemon. However, this can lead to stagnant gameplay, where preserving resources is more about optimizing your one turn and using everything you can before passing, rather than interacting with your opponent or making long-term plans. It's not a complete loss. Runeterra has combated this by allowing mana to carry over from turn to turn, but only for certain types of cards, and by allowing cross-turn interaction, which makes mana control much more interesting. The linear mana progression of these games is definitely easier to grasp and less frustrating than Magic's lands, but it doesn't tend to promote exciting gameplay. It also makes resource management a much less important part of the game. It's a case of expediency over complexity. Now it's finally time to talk about Digimon. Let's talk about what makes Digimon different from the games we've seen so far. Digimon's resource system is originally based on Chrono Clash, which has been used for a variety of living card games. Here's a gist of how the system works. In Digimon, each player shares a single resource track called Memory. Let's say you have 4 memory. If you play a 3-cost card, you go down to 1 memory, but it's still your turn. Then, if you play a 2-cost card, you move the marker over to your opponent's side, giving them 1 memory. Once your opponent has any memory, your turn immediately ends and theirs begins. In this case, they start their turn with 1 memory. This means that resource management in Digimon is a constant push and pull with no hard stops. You simply play cards trying to maximize the value of your memory while keeping your opponent starved for resources. Even though there are no instant speed cards that let you interact on your opponent's turn, you frequently pass the turns back and forth as you typically play with low amounts of memory. This keeps the pace of the game pretty high. But how do you play your high-value cards without allowing your opponent to get you right back? That's where Digivolution comes into play. In the older Digimon TCGs, Digimon evolved like Pokemon, along specific lines. You needed a combination of specifically named cards, along with support cards, to evolve. Instead, the new Digimon TCG works more like Cardfight Vanguard. Every Digimon is given a level, and can evolve one step up to the next level, so long as you match their color. Evolving Digimon is great because it nets you a reduced cost. Compare the 12 memory cost to play a Seraphimon from hand, to just its 3 memory cost to evolve. Seraphimon also has an on-Digivolve trigger, meaning if you play this as an evolution on top of a level 5 Digimon, you get a powerful bonus effect. But some Digimon have on-play effects, meaning it's still worthwhile to play these high-cost cards from your hands and reap their powerful effects. You're in a balancing act of wanting to be cost-efficient by evolving your Mons, and to go wide and present a bigger threat by playing these cards on their own. In comparison to Magic, where stacking buffs on a single creature is just asking to get blown out, evolving a single Digimon all the way from the lowest form to the highest form can give you a game-winning power boost. The reward of going all in on a single Digimon is well worth the risk of your opponent having a counterplay. Another advantage of this system is that you always need to be aware of what your opponent wants to be doing. If you know that they need 6 memory to evolve into their biggest threat while still keeping their turn so they can attack with it, you want to constantly pass to your opponent so that they have no more than 5 memory. This means that the resource system is an active part of the game, where you have to consider both what's best for you and what's worst for your opponent. By the way, there are option cards, which are like spells in Magic. Option cards have no way to reduce their cost, but are usually very impactful, meaning that to access powerful spells, like unconditional removal, you have to accept the high memory cost. This means that really strong option cards are balanced by letting your opponent take a big turn in response. There are a lot of other ways that you can interact with this memory system. There are Digimon that have reduced costs if you tap other Digimon when playing them, or cards that make it so you always start your turn with at least 3 memory, which changes how your opponent wants to play, and cards which can only attack if you pay a memory cost, but are powerful on defense. As a result, Digimon feels like a very mature and well-developed game, far more than its just about a year-old age would suggest. There are interesting archetypes in every color, and the way the base resource system works encourages interactivity and thoughtful play. Unfortunately, paper cards in America are pretty expensive right now until the set 1.5 launch on the 12th of March, which should see some big reprints. But there are other ways to play the game online, and there are lots of active online communities. If you're a Magic player who's been disinterested in trying out other card games, I really think you should give this one a try. I was immediately hooked by the gameplay, which was lighter and quicker than Magic, but has a really interesting depth all its own. Also, look at the cards. Just look at them.